The restaurant came alive every evening like a carefully planned show. Lights softened, glasses sparkled, and quiet music floated through the air. Guests walked in dressed in their best clothes, speaking in calm voices, expecting everything to be perfect. Waiters moved smoothly between tables, balancing trays and offering polite smiles. In the kitchen, however, things were very different. It was loud, fast, and filled with pressure. Orders were shouted, pans clanged, and steam filled the air. At the far end of the kitchen, near the sinks, stood someone most people never noticed. He worked quietly, almost like he was part of the background. Plates, glasses, and utensils kept coming his way in endless piles. He washed them, dried them, and stacked them without stopping. His hands moved quickly, used to the rhythm of the job. Water splashed, soap bubbled, and time passed without anyone paying much attention to him. Most of the staff barely spoke to him unless it was about work. Not because they were unkind, but because everyone was busy. In a place like this, people focused on their own tasks. The chefs cared about food, the waiters cared about guests, and the manager cared about everything running smoothly. The dishwasher was simply there, doing his part quietly. He never complained. Even when the workload became heavy, he stayed calm. If something broke or slipped, he cleaned it up without making a scene. If someone rushed him, he nodded and worked faster. He didn't argue or explain. He just kept going. But there was something about him that no one really noticed. Sometimes, when the kitchen door swung open, music from the dining area would drift inside. It was soft piano music, meant to create a peaceful mood for the guests. Most of the staff didn't even hear it anymore. They were too used to it. But he always noticed. For a brief moment, his hands would slow down. Not stop completely, just slow enough to feel the change. His head would tilt slightly, like he was trying to catch every note. His eyes would lose focus, as if he was somewhere else for a second. Then, just as quickly, he would return to work, picking up the next plate, scrubbing it clean, stacking it neatly. No one paid attention to these small moments. They were easy to miss. There was a waiter who once stood near the sink waiting for clean glasses. He noticed something unusual. The dishwasher was tapping lightly against the edge of the sink. It wasn't random. It had a pattern, almost like a rhythm that matched the music outside. The waiter watched for a second, then smiled to himself. He thought it was just a habit, maybe something people do when they're bored. He didn't think much of it and walked away. Another time, one of the cooks heard a faint sound while passing by. It sounded like humming. Soft, steady, and strangely beautiful. The cook turned his head slightly but didn't stop. In a busy kitchen, small things like that get lost quickly. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. The restaurant stayed the same, always busy, always full of life. Guests came and went. Some celebrated special occasions, some had quiet dinners, and some came just to enjoy the atmosphere. And the dishwasher remained the same too. Quiet, focused, invisible. Yet, inside him there was a world no one could see. Every now and then, when he carried a stack of clean plates toward the front, he would pass by the dining area. He never stopped, never slowed down enough to draw attention. But his eyes would always find the piano. It stood near the corner, polished and elegant, almost like a decoration. On certain nights, a pianist would sit there, playing gentle melodies that filled the room. Guests would listen while eating, some nodding along, others barely noticing. But he noticed every single note. As he walked past, holding plates carefully, his eyes would stay on the piano for just a moment longer than needed. There was something in that look. Not just curiosity, not just interest, something deeper. Then he would quickly look away and return to the kitchen, as if he didn't want anyone to see that moment. It was like the piano belonged to a different world. A world of calm, beauty, and attention. A world far away from the noise of the kitchen and the endless stacks of dishes. One evening, the restaurant was especially busy. Every table was filled, and the orders kept coming faster than usual. The kitchen was under pressure, and everyone was moving quickly. At the sink, the pile of dishes grew higher and higher. Still, he didn't rush in a careless way. His movements stayed steady, controlled. He had learned that rushing too much only created mistakes. As he worked, the sound of piano music drifted in again. This time it was slightly louder. The melody was slow and emotional, filling even the busy kitchen with a strange kind of calm. For a brief moment, something changed in his expression. He closed his eyes just for a second. His fingers paused over a plate. Then, without realizing it, he tapped gently on the surface in front of him, following the rhythm perfectly. Not missing a beat, not hesitating. It was natural, almost like he had done it many times before. But just as quickly, the moment passed. A loud voice called out for more clean plates, and he opened his eyes, returning to his work as if nothing had happened. No one noticed, or maybe they noticed but didn't understand what they were seeing. Because in a place like this, people often see only what they expect to see. A dishwasher washing dishes. Nothing more. The night continued, and the restaurant slowly began to quiet down. Guests finished their meals, conversations faded, and one by one, tables became empty. The staff started cleaning up, preparing for the next day. At the sink, the final batch of dishes was being washed. The noise was softer now, less urgent. The pressure of the evening had passed. He worked the same way he always did, careful and steady. But this time, there was no music coming from the dining area. The piano stood silent, untouched. For a moment he looked toward it again. The room was empty now. Chairs were pushed in, lights were dimmed slightly, and everything felt still. He held a plate in his hand but didn't move. His eyes stayed on the piano a little longer than usual. There was no rush anymore. No one was watching. Then he slowly turned back to his work and placed the plate down, continuing as if that moment had never happened. The night ended like every other night. The staff left one by one, saying short goodbyes. The lights were turned off, and the restaurant fell into silence. Another day was done. Another day where nothing seemed unusual. Another day where a hidden story remained unseen. But sometimes the most ordinary places hold something unexpected. Something waiting quietly. Something that doesn't ask for attention, but carries something special within. And all it takes is one moment, one chance, for everything to change. For now, though, he was still just the dishwasher, standing at the sink, washing plates, waiting without even knowing it, for the world to finally notice. Days passed in the same steady rhythm, and the restaurant continued to run like a well-practiced routine. Every evening brought new faces, new conversations, and the same quiet music drifting through the air. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing felt different on the surface. But small things were happening, the kind people usually ignore. In the kitchen, the dishwasher kept doing his job the same way. Calm, focused, and mostly silent. The staff had gotten used to him being there, almost like a machine that never slowed down. They didn't expect anything unusual from him, and he never gave them a reason to think otherwise. Still, a few moments began to stand out. One afternoon, before the dinner rush started, the kitchen was quieter than usual. Some of the staff were preparing ingredients, others were taking a short break. The dishwasher was at his station, finishing the last few trays from lunch. Without realizing it, he started tapping lightly on a metal tray. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to be heard in the quiet space. The sound had a pattern, smooth and steady, like a beat you could follow. A young worker nearby looked over, slightly curious. He didn't say anything at first. He just listened for a few seconds. The tapping wasn't random at all. It had structure, almost like a piece of music without notes. "Why are you tapping like that?" the worker finally asked, half smiling. The dishwasher stopped immediately, as if he had been caught doing something wrong. He shook his head lightly and went back to washing, avoiding eye contact. "Just like that," the worker said, still smiling. It sounded like something. There was no answer. The moment passed quickly, and the worker didn't push further. In a busy place, people don't usually stop to explore small things. He simply walked away, leaving the dishwasher to his work. But the sound of that tapping stayed in his mind for a while. Later that evening, the restaurant filled up again. The piano in the dining area was being played by a guest musician. The melody was gentle at first, then slowly grew more complex. It added a warm feeling to the room, making everything feel calm and complete. In the kitchen, the dishwasher could hear it clearly. As he worked, his movements began to match the rhythm of the music. Plates were placed down with soft timing. Glasses were arranged in a way that almost followed the beat. It wasn't something he planned. It just happened naturally. One of the waiters came in to pick up clean glasses and noticed something strange. The dishwasher was humming again. This time, it wasn't just a simple tune. It was detailed, with changes in pitch and flow. It sounded almost like he was recreating the music from outside, but in his own quiet way. The waiter paused for a moment, listening more carefully. "You know that song?" he asked. The dishwasher looked up, slightly surprised. For a second, it seemed like he might say something, but then he just gave a small nod and looked back down. "You've heard it before?" the waiter continued. Another small nod. The waiter raised his eyebrows, a little impressed. "You remember it that well?" There was no answer this time. The dishwasher picked up another plate and continued working. The waiter waited for a second, then shrugged and left. It was interesting but not important enough to think about for long. There were customers waiting and work to be done. Still, something about that moment felt different. As the days went on, these small moments kept happening. Someone noticed how he tapped perfect rhythms without thinking. Someone else noticed how he could hum melodies almost exactly after hearing them once. Another worker once saw him gently pressing his fingers against the edge of the counter, moving them like he was playing invisible keys. It was quick, almost impossible to catch unless you were really paying attention. But no one was paying that much attention. To them, he was still just the dishwasher. One night, after closing time, a few staff members stayed back a little longer than usual. They were tired, talking quietly while finishing up their tasks. The restaurant was empty, and the piano stood alone in the corner, silent under the soft lights. One of the workers joked, pointing toward the piano. "I wish I could play that. Looks easy when someone else does it." Another laughed. "Yeah, until you sit there and realize you don't know where to start." They all shared a light moment before going back to work. At the sink, the dishwasher heard the conversation, but didn't react. He kept washing the last few dishes, his focus steady as always. But when he finished, something unusual happened. Instead of leaving immediately like he always did, he stood still for a moment. The kitchen was quiet now. The others were busy with their own tasks, not paying attention. He slowly wiped his hands and looked toward the dining area. The piano was still there, untouched. For a few seconds it felt like time slowed down. He took a small step forward, then stopped. It was almost like he was thinking about something he wasn't sure he should do. But then, just as quickly, he turned away. He picked up his bag and walked out without saying anything. The moment disappeared, just like all the others. The next day, everything returned to normal again. The restaurant filled up, the kitchen grew loud, and the routine continued. But now, a few people had started to notice small things. Not enough to understand, but enough to feel curious. There was something unusual about the quiet dishwasher. Something they couldn't fully explain. One evening, during a slower hour, the manager stood near the kitchen entrance, watching the staff work. His eyes moved from one person to another, checking if everything was running smoothly. For a brief moment, his attention landed on the dishwasher. He watched him for a few seconds. The way he moved, the way his hands worked with steady timing, the way he seemed completely focused yet calm at the same time. Then, without warning, the dishwasher tapped the edge of the sink again. A soft, perfect rhythm, almost like a quiet performance no one had asked for. The manager frowned slightly, not in anger, but in curiosity. He didn't say anything. He just watched for a moment longer, then walked away. Maybe it meant nothing, or maybe it meant something he hadn't figured out yet. The night went on, and the restaurant slowly filled with the sound of laughter, conversation, and music. In the middle of it all, the dishwasher continued his work. Quiet, unnoticed, but no longer completely invisible. Because sometimes it only takes a few small signs for people to start looking a little closer. And once they start looking, they begin to see things they missed before. Something was there. something hidden in plain sight, something waiting for the right moment to be seen, the kind of thing that doesn't force its way into the world, but quietly waits until the world is ready. And without anyone realizing it, that moment was getting closer. The evening started differently from the moment the doors opened. There was a sense of pressure in the air, something everyone could feel but no one said out loud. The restaurant had hosted busy nights before, but this one carried more weight. Important guests had reserved several tables. The kind of guests who noticed everything. Every detail, every delay, every small mistake. The manager had reminded everyone twice to stay sharp. The waiters moved a little faster, spoke a little more carefully. In the kitchen, the chefs worked with extra focus, making sure every plate looked perfect before it left the counter. At the sink, the dishwasher noticed the difference too, even if no one explained it to him. The plates started coming in earlier than usual, and in larger numbers. Glasses clinked together, trays filled up quickly, and the pace didn't slow down. He adjusted without thinking. His hands moved faster but still controlled. He had learned how to handle pressure quietly. No complaints, no panic, just steady work. Out in the dining area, the lights glowed softly, and the tables slowly filled. Guests arrived dressed with care, speaking in calm, confident tones. Everything looked just as it should, except for one thing. The piano was empty. At first, no one paid attention. It wasn't unusual for the pianist to arrive a little later. The staff continued their work, assuming the music would begin any moment. But minutes passed, then more. The soft background noise of conversation filled the room, but something was missing. The usual calm that came with the piano wasn't there. It felt subtle but noticeable. The manager checked the time again. His expression changed slightly. He walked toward the front desk and spoke quietly to one of the staff members. A phone call was made, then another. Each time the answer was the same. No response. Back in the kitchen, the dishwasher continued working, unaware of the situation building outside. Plates kept coming in, and he stayed focused on his task. But even he noticed something felt different. The usual music hadn't started. The silence from the dining area reached further into the kitchen than usual. It wasn't complete silence, but without the piano, the space felt less balanced. A waiter walked in quickly, placing a tray of glasses by the sink with a bit more force than needed. "They still haven't come," he said to another worker nearby. "Who?" someone asked. "The pianist. No one can reach them." A few heads turned for a second, then went back to work. It was a problem, but not their problem. Still, it added to the tension in the air. The dishwasher heard the conversation but didn't react. He simply continued washing, though his movements slowed just slightly. In the dining area, the manager stood near the piano, thinking. Guests were starting to notice now. A few looked toward the empty seat, then back at their tables. The atmosphere felt incomplete. One of the regular guests even asked a waiter, "No music tonight?" The waiter gave a polite smile. "It will start shortly." But even he wasn't sure. Back in the kitchen, the conversation continued in small bursts between tasks. "They should just play something from a speaker," one worker suggested. "It's not the same," another replied. "People expect live music here." Someone laughed lightly. "Then one of you go play." It was meant as a joke, and a few chuckled before returning to their work. Then, almost casually, one of them said, "What about him?" There was a brief pause. "Who?" "The dishwasher. You've seen him, right? Always tapping, humming like he knows what he's doing." A couple of people smiled, amused by the idea. "Yeah, right," someone said. "You think he can just walk out there and play?" "I don't know," the first worker shrugged. "Just saying, he's got better rhythm than most of us." The conversation faded quickly. It wasn't serious, just something to fill the moment. But not everyone forgot it. Near the entrance of the kitchen, the manager had walked in quietly. He wasn't there to listen, but he had heard enough. He didn't react immediately. He simply stood there for a second, looking toward the sink. The dishwasher was working like always, focused, quiet, unaware of the attention for a brief moment. The manager watched him closely. The steady movements, the calm expression, and then, almost on cue, the dishwasher tapped lightly against the edge of the sink again. A clean, even rhythm that didn't sound random at all. The manager's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just watched. For a few seconds, it felt like he was thinking through something carefully. Then he turned and walked back out. In the dining area, the situation hadn't improved. Guests were still waiting, the atmosphere still missing something important. The manager looked at the empty piano again. It wasn't just about music. It was about experience. The feeling the place was supposed to give. Without it, everything felt slightly off. He took a deep breath. Then, slowly, he made a decision. Back in the kitchen, the dishwasher had just finished another stack of plates when someone approached him. "Hey," the worker said, a bit unsure. "Can you come for a second?" The dishwasher looked up, confused. "Now?" "Yeah, just come." He wiped his hands quickly and followed, not knowing what to expect. As he stepped out of the kitchen, the noise changed. The loud, fast sounds behind him faded, replaced by the softer, controlled atmosphere of the dining area. He wasn't used to being there like this. People were seated, talking quietly, dressed in ways that made him feel out of place. He kept his head slightly down as he walked. The manager stood near the piano, waiting. When the dishwasher got closer, he stopped a few steps away, unsure why he had been called. For a moment, no one spoke. The manager looked at him carefully, as if trying to read something. Then he said, in a calm but direct voice, "I heard you have a sense of rhythm." The dishwasher blinked, surprised. He didn't answer. "I need someone to play," the manager continued. "Just something simple, enough to bring the room together." The words hung in the air. The dishwasher's eyes moved toward the piano. For the first time, he was standing this close to it. It looked different up close. Bigger. More real. I can't," he said quietly, almost immediately. The manager didn't look convinced. "You don't have to be perfect. Just try." "I've never..." He stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. The truth felt too big to explain. The manager took a small step closer. "We don't have anyone else right now." There was no pressure in his tone, but there was urgency. The dishwasher looked around. A few staff members were watching from a distance. Some curious, some doubtful. He felt their eyes. His hands felt slightly cold. "I'm not supposed to be here," he said softly. The manager shook his head. "Right now, this is exactly where you're supposed to be." There was a long pause. The kind of pause where everything feels still, even though people are moving all around. The dishwasher looked at the piano again. Then at the floor. Then back at the piano. Something inside him felt like it was pulling in two directions. One part telling him to step back, return to the kitchen, stay invisible. The other part, saying nothing, but feeling stronger with every second. Finally, he took a slow breath, and nodded. It was a small nod, almost uncertain, but it was enough. The manager stepped aside, giving him space. Every step toward the piano felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the distance, but because of what it meant. The room didn't go completely silent, but something changed. A few guests noticed movement near the piano and turned their heads. The dishwasher reached the seat and stood there for a second. He had never sat here before. Never like this. He slowly pulled the chair back and sat down. His hands rested near his lap. For a moment, he didn't move at all. The piano keys were right in front of him now. Close enough to touch. Close enough to change everything. But he didn't press a single key. Not yet. The room waited, even if it didn't fully realize it was waiting. And in that quiet moment, something was about to begin. For a few long seconds, nothing happened. He sat in front of the piano, his back straight but tense, his hands resting near his lap. The keys were right there, close enough that he could feel their presence without even touching them. The soft lights from above reflected on the polished surface, making everything feel even more exposed. Around him, the restaurant continued its quiet movement. Plates were being served, glasses were being placed gently on tables, and conversations continued in low voices. But something had shifted. People had started to notice. A few guests turned their heads toward the piano, curious. Some thought maybe this was part of the evening. Others simply watched, unsure of what was about to happen. From the side, a couple of staff members stood still for a moment longer than they should have. They had seen him in the kitchen, surrounded by soap and water, never in a place like this. Seeing him sit at the piano felt strange, almost unreal. One of them whispered quietly, "Is he really going to play?" Another shrugged, not taking their eyes off him. "I don't know." At the piano, he finally lifted his hands slowly. They hovered above the keys, but didn't press down. His fingers trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of the moment. He could feel it, all of it. The room, the silence, the eyes, even the quiet doubt in the air. He swallowed gently, trying to steady himself. His breathing was shallow at first, uneven. He closed his eyes for a brief second, as if trying to block everything out. In that moment, the restaurant disappeared for him. The voices faded, the pressure softened, and all that remained was the memory of sound. The music he had heard again and again, carried through doors, through noise, through distance. When he opened his eyes again, something in his expression had changed. Not confidence, not yet, but focus. He lowered his hands slightly. Then, finally, his fingers touched the keys. The first note came out soft. So soft that for a second, it almost got lost in the room. But it was there. Clear. Real. He paused for a fraction of a moment, as if listening to it himself. Then came the second note. Then the third. Slowly, carefully, like someone testing the ground before taking a full step. At first, it sounded simple. Nothing complex. Nothing impressive. Just a gentle melody, played with caution. Some of the guests who had turned to look began to turn back again, thinking it was just background music starting late. A few lost interest quickly, returning to their meals and conversations. But others stayed. Something about the way he played felt different. It wasn't just about the notes. It was about the feeling behind them. At the side of the room, the manager stood quietly, watching. His face showed no clear reaction yet, but his attention was fixed. Back in the kitchen entrance, a few workers had gathered just enough to see what was happening. They didn't step out fully, but they leaned slightly, trying to catch a glimpse. "He's actually playing," one whispered. "Yeah, but it's just simple," another replied. Still, they didn't walk away. At the piano, his hands began to move more naturally. The hesitation started to fade. The notes connected more smoothly now, forming a melody that felt more complete. It wasn't just random anymore. It had direction. He was no longer testing the keys. He was playing. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and his breathing became steadier. His fingers moved with more confidence, pressing the keys with better timing, better control. The sound began to fill the space more clearly. Not loud, but present. At a nearby table, one guest paused mid-conversation. He tilted his head slightly, listening more carefully. "Wait," he said quietly. "This doesn't sound like someone just trying." His companion looked toward the piano again, this time with more interest. Across the room, another guest set down their glass slowly, their eyes fixed on the performer. The melody had shifted, carried something deeper now, something that made people feel even if they couldn't explain why. Back near the kitchen, the same worker who had joked earlier about the dishwasher playing stood completely still now. "That's not normal," he said under his breath. No one answered him. They were all listening. At the piano, he didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look around at all. His focus stayed on the keys, as if the rest of the world didn't exist anymore. His fingers began to move faster, not rushed, but more sure. The melody grew richer, more detailed. It rose and fell naturally, carrying emotion that didn't feel practiced, but lived. It was no longer simple, and that's when more people started to notice. Conversations began to slow down across the room. Some stopped completely. Heads turned, one by one, as the music reached them. It wasn't loud enough to demand attention, but it was strong enough to hold it. The manager's expression changed slightly. Not fully, but enough to show that he was no longer just observing. He was listening, carefully, as if trying to understand something. The waiter who had once asked him about the humming stepped closer to the side of the room. His eyes were wide, his face showing a mix of surprise and disbelief. "That's him?" he whispered to no one in particular. No one needed to answer. They all knew. At the piano, something else shifted. His fear had not disappeared completely, but it had moved to the background. In its place, something more familiar had taken over. Comfort. Not with the situation, but with the music itself. His fingers now moved across the keys with a natural flow, as if they already knew where to go before he thought about it. The pauses became intentional. The changes in tone felt controlled. It was no longer about trying to play. It was about expressing something. Something he had carried quietly for a long time. The melody changed again, becoming deeper, more emotional. It held a weight that reached beyond the room, beyond the moment. And now the entire restaurant felt it. People were no longer eating without thinking. They were listening. Some leaned back in their chairs. Some simply sat still. Even the staff, trained to keep moving no matter what, found themselves slowing down. For the first time that evening, the restaurant felt complete. But not in the way anyone had expected. Because no one had planned for this. No one had imagined this moment. And yet, here it was. At the center of it all sat someone who, just minutes ago, had been standing at a sink washing dishes in silence. Now he sat in front of a piano, filling the room with something no one could ignore. The doubt hadn't fully disappeared from everyone. Some still watched with cautious eyes, waiting to see if it would fall apart. But the longer he played, the harder it became to hold onto that doubt. Because what they were hearing didn't sound like luck. It didn't sound like a simple attempt. It sounded real. And it was only just beginning. The music didn't stop. Instead, it grew. What had started as something soft and careful was now turning into something deeper. Something that held the entire room without asking for attention. It didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like a performance meant to impress. It felt honest. His fingers moved across the keys with more freedom now. The hesitation from before had faded almost completely. Every note connected smoothly to the next, like a story being told without words. At the tables, people had stopped pretending to focus on their meals. Forks rested quietly on plates. Glasses were left untouched. Conversations had either faded into whispers or disappeared entirely. The restaurant, which had been full of movement and noise just a short while ago, was now filled with stillness. A kind of stillness that only comes when something truly captures attention. Near the entrance, a couple who had been in the middle of a conversation slowly turned their chairs toward the piano. They didn't say anything to each other. They just listened. At another table, someone leaned forward slightly, resting their arms on the table, eyes fixed on the performer. There was a look of quiet surprise on their face, the kind that grows slowly when you realize you're witnessing something unexpected. The waiters, trained to move quickly and quietly, found themselves slowing down. One of them stood near a table a second longer than needed, forgetting for a moment that he was supposed to be working. Another, carrying a tray, paused just enough to glance toward the piano again, as if needing to confirm that what he was hearing was real. Back near the kitchen, a few workers had gathered closer now. They weren't hiding their curiosity anymore. They stood near the doorway watching openly. "That's not just good," one of them whispered. "No," another replied quietly. "That's something else." No one laughed this time. No one made jokes, because there was nothing funny about what they were hearing. At the piano, he still didn't look up. His focus remained on the keys, but his expression had changed. There was a calmness now, a sense of belonging in the moment that hadn't been there before. It was as if the piano was no longer something distant or unreachable. It was familiar, something he understood. The melody shifted again, becoming more powerful. It rose higher, then dropped gently, like waves moving with purpose. There was emotion in it, something that couldn't be explained easily but could be felt clearly. A guest sitting near the front closed their eyes for a moment, letting the music settle in. Another gave a small shake of their head, almost in disbelief. The manager stood in the same place, his arms now crossed loosely. His eyes hadn't left the performer since the first note. There was no longer any doubt in his expression. Only realization. Realization that something rare was happening. Something he hadn't planned for. Something he almost missed. The music continued to build, but not in a loud or dramatic way. It didn't need to be loud to be strong. It carried its strength in the way it moved, in the way it held attention without demanding it. His hands moved faster now, but still controlled. Every movement had purpose. Every note felt placed, not random. It was no longer just music filling the background. It had become the center of the room. At one table, a guest slowly began to clap once, softly, as if they couldn't hold it in anymore. But then they stopped, realizing the piece wasn't finished. They smiled slightly, waiting. Others noticed the movement and exchanged quiet looks, all of them understanding without words that this moment was still unfolding. The waiter who had first noticed the humming stood closer now, his face showing a mix of pride and disbelief. "I knew there was something," he said quietly, but even he hadn't imagined this. At the piano, he shifted into a softer part of the melody. The notes became slower again, more gentle, like a calm after something intense. Felt like a conversation, one that didn't need words. And then, slowly, the music began to come to a close. Not suddenly, not sharply, but gradually, like a story reaching its final lines. Each note spaced slightly further apart. Each sound lingering just a little longer in the air. The room held its breath without realizing it. And then, the final note stayed for a moment, soft but clear, then faded. Silence followed. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that feels full. Full of everything that had just happened. For a second, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the room needed time to catch up, to understand what it had just experienced. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. Just one person. Then another. And another. Within moments, the entire room filled with applause. Not loud at first, but growing quickly. Strong. Real. People stood up from their seats. Some smiled widely. Others simply clapped with quiet respect. The sound of appreciation filled the space completely now, replacing the earlier silence. At the piano, he didn't react immediately. His hands rested lightly on his lap again, just like before. He looked down for a second, as if unsure of what to do. Then slowly he looked up. For the first time he saw all of them. All the faces. All the attention. All the recognition. It was overwhelming. But not in a negative way. In a way that felt unfamiliar. New. The kind of moment he had never expected to be part of. Near the back, the kitchen staff joined in the applause too. Some of them smiled openly, shaking their heads in disbelief. "That's the same guy," one of them said, almost laughing in surprise. "Yeah," another replied. "Same guy." The manager stepped forward slightly, still clapping. His eyes locked on the performer. There was something different in the way he looked at him now. Not as an employee, not as someone in the background, but as someone valuable, someone worth noticing. At the tables, a few guests leaned toward each other, speaking quietly but excitedly. "Who is he? Where did he come from? Why have we never seen him before?" Questions filled the room, but no one had answers yet, because the truth was simple. He had always been there, just not seen. The applause continued for a few more moments before slowly settling down. But the feeling remained. The energy in the room had changed completely. What started as a problem, a missing pianist, had turned into something no one could have planned. Something real. Something unforgettable. And at the center of it all was someone who, just a short time ago, had been standing quietly at a sink, washing dishes unseen and unnoticed. Now, there was no way anyone could overlook him again. The applause didn't fade quickly. It stayed in the air, strong and steady, as if the room didn't want the moment to end. People kept clapping, some even standing longer than expected, not out of habit, but because they genuinely felt something. At the piano, he slowly stood up. His movements were careful, almost unsure, like he didn't fully believe what had just happened. Just a short while ago, he had been in the kitchen, surrounded by noise and steam, doing his usual work without thinking about anything beyond the next stack of dishes. Now every eye in the room was on him. It was a strange feeling, not uncomfortable, but unfamiliar. He gave a small nod without realizing it, not as a performance gesture, but more like a quiet acknowledgement. He didn't know what else to do. The applause slowly began to soften, but the energy in the room remained. The manager stepped forward first. He didn't rush. His steps were calm, controlled, but there was something new in his expression. Respect. The kind that doesn't come easily, but once it appears, it's clear. He stopped a few steps away, looking directly at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the manager said, quietly but clearly, "Where did you learn to play like that?" It was a simple question, but the answer wasn't simple. He looked down for a second, thinking. "I didn't really learn in one place," he said slowly. "Just over time." His voice was soft just like always. The manager watched him closely, trying to understand. "Over time," he repeated. He nodded. "I used to listen," he added after a short pause, "whenever I could, and sometimes practice where I found a chance." There was no long explanation, no dramatic story, just simple words, but they carried weight. The manager didn't ask more questions right away. He didn't need to. What mattered was already clear. This wasn't luck. This wasn't something that happened by accident. This was real. Around them, a few guests had started to move closer. Not too close, but enough to feel part of the moment. Some smiled politely, others looked at him with curiosity. One of them spoke up. "That was beautiful." He looked slightly surprised, then nodded again, quietly. Another guest added, "You should be playing here more often." He didn't respond to that. Not because he didn't hear it, but because he didn't know how to answer. Back near the kitchen, the staff had fully stepped out now. They didn't try to hide their reactions anymore. One of them laughed softly, shaking his head. "All this time," another replied, "and we had no idea." The waiter who had first noticed the humming walked closer, stopping just at the edge of the group. "I knew there was something," he said, this time with a small smile that carried a bit of pride. Their eyes met for a brief second. No words were needed. There was understanding there. The manager turned slightly, looking at the piano, then back at him. "From tomorrow," he said, his tone calm but firm, "you won't be in the kitchen all the time." He paused, making sure his words were clear. "We'll find a way for you to play." The words hung in the air. They weren't loud. They weren't dramatic. But they changed everything. For a second, he didn't react. Felt like too much to take in at once. "You don't have to decide everything now," the manager added, noticing his hesitation. "But this shouldn't stay hidden." There was no pressure in his voice, only certainty. He nodded slowly, still processing. The idea felt distant, almost unreal. Playing in front of people. Not once, but again, and again. It wasn't something he had ever planned. But now it was right in front of him. The guests slowly began to return to their tables, but the mood had changed completely. Conversations picked up again, but they carried a different tone now. Lighter, warmer. Some people kept looking toward the piano, as if expecting another moment like the one they had just witnessed. Others smiled quietly to themselves, still thinking about the music. The restaurant felt alive in a new way, not just polished and perfect, but real. Back at the piano, he stepped away slowly. Each step felt different from the ones he had taken earlier. Before, there had been doubt. Now there was something else. Not full confidence, but a beginning. As he walked past the tables, a few guests gave small nods or smiles. He returned them gently, still not used to the attention. When he reached the edge of the kitchen, he paused for a moment. The familiar sounds were there again. The clatter, the voices, the movement. It all felt the same. And yet it didn't, because he wasn't the same anymore. He stepped back inside. The sink was still there. The plates were still waiting. But for the first time, it didn't feel like the only place he belonged. One of the workers walked up to him, holding a tray. "Looks like you're not staying here forever," he said with a half smile. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, quietly, "I guess not." There was no arrogance in his tone. No pride in a loud way. Just a simple acceptance. The night continued, but something had shifted for everyone. The staff worked with a different kind of energy. The manager checked things as usual, but his mind returned to the piano more than once. And the guests carried the memory of the music with them as they finished their meals and slowly left. One by one, the tables emptied again. The lights softened. The doors eventually closed. But the feeling didn't disappear. Because moments like that don't fade easily. They stay. They change how people see things. How they see others. How they understand what might be hidden right in front of them. Later, as the final tasks were being done, he stood near the sink again. But this time, his hands didn't move right away. He looked toward the dining area. The piano stood there, quiet once more, just like before. But not the same. Not anymore. He took a slow breath. Then, without thinking, he tapped lightly on the edge of the sink again. The same rhythm. The same natural flow. But now it carried a different feeling. Not hidden. Not unnoticed. Just waiting for the next moment. Because now, that moment was no longer a question. It was part of what came next. And for the first time, the future didn't feel distant. Felt possible.